My name is Saskia Trail. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Research at TASC. We are a proud co-sponsor of this conference. And I want to do a quick thank you to our team as well. Shahira Payano, who's our policy coordinator at TASC, has been really helpful in putting together the panel. So just wanted to thank her for all of her work. We've been a proud partner with a number of school districts, New York City, our hometown in particular, but also working in Baltimore, in Yonkers, in New Orleans, and other places around the country. And so it's really my pleasure to get to moderate this panel to talk about district and local initiatives. I am supposed to say the remarks of the panelists are their own and not their institutions, so you've all heard that. Our goals for the next really 45, 50 minutes is to talk really fast, which is good because we've got a couple of New Yorkers on the team, so we'll be all right. But really for us to learn, I think we're among friends who all support expanded learning. We know it's not easy. And so to learn how school districts and municipal leaders are scaling those promises locally. How are they doing it? What are their challenges? How are they doing it in each of their communities? And how are those different depending on the context of those communities? The second is to highlight the connections between policy and practice and expanded learning. We know that if those two things aren't hand in hand, you can have great policies that actually don't turn into any kind of change for students, and you can have really great practice that happens despite a lot of the policies at the district or state level. And it gives us an opportunity to sort of consider that complex set of strategies that lead to different dimensions of scale as we think about scaling expanded learning in districts. So we're going to avoid sort of having the panel present because we have such a short amount of time, and we do want to leave time for questions. So, and I will ask you to look at the biographies of the panelists in the book that you got in your green Fidelity bag so that you get the background of these terrific panelists. What I wanted to do is start with our two district representatives. Mr. Caruso from the New York City Department of Education, not so long ago also of TASC. So my former colleague at TASC and our partner in the district. And Dr. Smith from a school district in Arizona, the Balt School District. And what I wanted to ask each of them to do is just describe what your expanded learning approach looks like in your two districts. We've got a relatively small district, a really big urban district. Would love to hear about what expanded learning looks like in your two districts.
Is this on? Oh, good. I'm very pleased to be here today. Thank you. I am the superintendent of the Balt School District in Phoenix, Arizona. We have about 2,500 students. We're kindergarten through 8th grade, and we have preschools and so on that we've brought along for our birth on through 8th grade and high school plan. The demographics of Balts are 90% of our students are, over 90% are free and reduced lunch. So we have most of our kids are in high need, our families are the working poor. Our demographics also include over 70% of our students are Hispanic. We have African refugees, homeless shelters, and so on. So we have a very high needs population. Half of our kids that come into school are learning English as a second language. When I first came to Balts, it was in 2007 and 2008. It was the same time, if you recall, when President Obama was running for office and he called for schools to expand their school year, and we took him up on it. And so what we did was took advantage of a little-known Arizona law that allows for a school system to increase their school days by 20 days for a total of 200 days. So the school system has to change all of their schools. They all have to go 20 days. You can't go 10 days and get, less or whatever. 5% more funding. That created quite a challenge for school systems, and several tried but could not quite get it passed. Whether the parents weren't in favor or the teachers weren't in favor or there just wasn't enough money, nobody could really make it happen until we did. And so we've been doing this now for 6 years, where our kids now are going to school an additional month. We start school in about the 3rd week in July. We end about the 2nd week of June. We have a 6-week summer break in the summer, 2 weeks in the winter, and a week in the fall and the spring. So we have a pretty traditional year other than the summer, 6-week summer break. We've had, along with that, we've had a very holistic approach to working outside the school walls as well as within. So we have our Balts Promise neighborhood, which is modeled after Harlem's Children's Zone, which is collective impact, bringing in nonprofits to increase and improve that quality of life outside of the school walls while you're also working within the school walls. The summer learning loss was crippling our system, but now that we've been doing this for 6 years, we've seen increases in academics for math, reading, science, And most interestingly and logically, English language learners are learning English at a much higher rate. Another month of school, another month less out of school. Along with curriculum maps, working with our teachers, we also have changed our incentive or how we pay teachers. It's now not based on seniority, it is based on student progress and achievement, which also helps to make the longer year desirable because your kids will achieve more. And so I don't want to go on other than to just talk about that we've kind of looked inside the schools, outside the school walls. We've had a longer year for 6 years now, and we've been very pleased with the progress.
Hi, good morning. So I am the executive director of the new Office of Community Schools at the New York City Department of Education. We're a school system of 1.1 million kids. We have about 1,600 schools. Feels like it changes every week how many schools we have, so I'm going to stick with that number for this morning's purposes. Should be in place still by the end of the day. We have a number of different interesting pilots going on and different work going on for expanded learning. I think one of the interesting things in our system is that with so many different schools and so many different neighborhoods, you can try, there's a lot of work that's happening at any given time. And one of our goals, and one of the goals of Mayor de Blasio and Chancellor Farina, is to build a system so that the department is supporting the work on the ground. We're fortunate enough to have really terrific nonprofit organizations that have been carrying a lot of the expanded learning water for over a decade now. And we also have some terrific principals who are on the weight of their own leadership doing really interesting work in a number of different schools. But we haven't built a system so that all the pieces are connected. And that's what community schools is serving as the anchor to do going forward. I would say a couple things to note. One is just in thinking about the amount of time that it takes to build the capacity of a system to get to the place where we are. You know, over the past 15 to 20 years, our city has had a number of different investments in capacity building of nonprofit organizations. The Afterschool Corporation led the effort in that, followed by Mayor Bloomberg's out-of-school time system. We have the Partnership for After-School Education in our city, and really focusing on how nonprofit organizations are building not only their direct service capacity, but their organizational structure to partner with schools. And so much of our expanded learning work looks like a combination of teachers and community educators from nonprofits coming together around an aligned set of goals. And I think it's that alignment, the woman on the panel previous to us was talking about the importance of aligning work, excuse me, during the school day and after school. And I think doing that with vision and purpose is the secret sauce here. Like, how do you really get that true alignment? The way that we're approaching this is to make sure that the goals are really clear both at the system level and at the school level, and then supporting leadership development in our nonprofit organizations and with our school leaders to hold one another accountable and to support a shared leadership approach. Beginning next year, we will be working with a set of 94 schools. These are schools that the state has deemed some of the lowest performing schools in the city. We've created a program called the Renewal Schools Program, and we're investing resources to, instead of closing these schools, we're really investing the resources so that we're turning around the experiences for children and families. And one of the critical elements of this work will be a longer school day for every student in each of these 94 schools. In total, we're talking about 60,000 students across these schools. That's going to be a combination of work with our teachers in our schools, and again, each school will be partnered with a nonprofit organizations, groups such as settlement houses, YMCAs, citizen schools, Bell, many groups that have a national presence, but also local organizations. And we'll be supporting them to, again, on this alignment front so that the resources and the activities meet the needs of kids, and we're offering the right services from the right people to the right kids at the right time.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if you both can talk about, you started already, to talk about the change management process. So you don't get from school plus after school or school and nothing to this kind of integrated model of expanded learning overnight. We know that. Dr. Smith, I'm wondering if you could talk about sort of how did you manage that change in the Bald School District when you found this Arizona law and moved forward with your expanded learning approach?
I think one of the things I would say is that reform, a lot of school reform initiatives are out there, but a lot of them are really retooling the system, taking the system and kind of changing it in so many different ways, where an extended year is really not. It's really taking what you do and acknowledging that people do a really good job, they can do better with more time. And given the system another month has challenges for the system, we only have 6 weeks to prepare schools, to get books and get things ready. So it really challenges the system. It asks more of everybody within the system. But it also is a very positive, and if people can buy into the belief that they're going to put in more, but kids are going to achieve more, and that they're going to have more of a sense of accomplishment by what they're doing, then they can really feel like they're fulfilling their dreams of what they want from an educational system. When we first started, it's such a out there kind of an idea, like another month. Where would that be? People would say, what would it look like? You know, so you have to really give them the calendars. And what we did was we said, this is one calendar, here's another one. This is what it would look like here, this is what it would look like here. We had to say, this is what more money would look like for you and your salaries. You have to be very tangible about the choices, but you don't want a paradox of choice where you have so many choices, like 10 calendars or something like that. So you want to limit it down to just a couple, would be my advice. And then you want study groups to look at the effects of it in a very academic way, an objective way. So what will happen in systems was they'll look at other schools and what's good for them. Look at your school. What is best for your school? What does the research say? Really delving into it and saying, kind of clearing the space away to say, what would this look like? What could it look like? Let's sit and discuss this rather than building up barriers of defense against some kind of change. And then once you bring in the change, it's staying the course, because so many efforts will be against it to go back. I have teachers, I can make more money somewhere else, or whatever those reasons may be, to really recruit the people into the system, knowing what they're getting into, being very clear with people, and then also fulfilling that and sticking with it, because people do buy into it and they want to see that change. But systems so often will go back. They'll slip back to the status quo. And so those are some of the challenges that I've seen. But we're continuing with that. We have more and more people that are coming into our system for this reason and staying in our system for that reason. So the support is building. And so I'm very encouraged by that.
Great.
Yeah, I think I'd like to echo what Jeff was talking about. I think that visual of giving people a calendar, right? The notion that this is a unique idea. This is different than the way that schools have been structured, and we've become so accustomed to a certain way of operating that we need to show people, we need to allow people to see something differently. And so whether it be a calendar or finding a pilot or an example where you can actually bring someone and show them this work, I think is a critical component. At the end of the day, I think this comes down to leadership at the local level and at the system level, right? So in New York, we're fortunate enough to have a mayor who's really set a broad vision and is repeating over and over again what he expects the school system to look like, right? This is about equity. It's about making sure that the school that you're zoned for based on the zip code that you're born into does not dictate your future, right? That every school has the ability to be a great school, right? And so how do we give kids the opportunities in no matter what neighborhood they're in to pick up the musical instrument like we heard before, or to participate in the sports team, or develop their leadership skills, or be in the book club, right? So we have to make sure that the leadership is presenting a constant vision and a clear vision across the system. And at the local level, I think what's really critical is that you have a set of stakeholders that are helping hold the system accountable. So Jeff mentioned that systems will slip back into the default mode, and that's absolutely right in New York, right? There's a lot of pressures, a lot of invested interests in keeping things the way that they are. And so you need an enlightened set of advocates, of parents, of practitioners who are constantly holding up the mirror and showing alternate pathways and different ways to do the work. And so, as someone that's on the inside and now that is getting those phone calls, it's hard, right? Because it's easy to fall short, and it's easy to fall back into the realm of, well, this is what the system will allow right now. But together, we have to push forward and identify and show a different way to operating.
So Leslie, TASC does a lot of coaching with school teams to help them navigate this process of developing these new plans and re-envisioning the day, as does Talbot Consulting. Can you talk about the change management process and how you help schools and districts sort of re-envision their school day and year?
Sure. Is it on? Okay, good. So we're a small independent consulting practice, and we specialize in kind of school restructuring, ed reform, et cetera. We've worked with district and charter public schools, and then also nonprofits. And the work that we've done with expanded learning has been in New Jersey, and with, in particular, Patterson and Newark, and then recently in Chicago with a charter management organization. And one of the things that we basically created this framework, and I have a PowerPoint slide, so, but the framework includes my big first areas, and I called it data. You know, getting data to really looking at all aspects of data, not just student performance data, but also collecting some of that qualitative data from parents and the students themselves, particularly since they're at the middle grades, you know, their interest areas, et cetera. And then using that data basically to determine the need. We also look at data from the local economy. So what are employers seeing in terms of young people that are coming out of high school, in terms of their learning challenges, et cetera. We do the same thing on the post-secondary end. And you know, what are, like, for instance, in some areas in New Jersey, incoming students coming into either community college or four-year colleges unfortunately have to take remedial courses, which you all know they don't get credit for, so, but they have to pay for them. So what are all of these needs that you know, that employers and colleges are seeing? So determining the need, which then at the third step is, you know, establishing partnerships with organizations, much to the way you were describing, nonprofit organizations, but also corporate entities, faith-based institutions, et cetera. And then outside of education, human service agencies that also can provide support services. So partnering with them to figure out, you know, who, what, where, how can they support. The fourth area is then creating a value-added program design, which, going back to my number one of data, is because I'm this person that believes in, you know, I think expanded learning is wonderful as long as we can prove that there's a value added, not just the touchy-feely value added or the safety value added, which are both important, but the value added on increased achievement and performance, both on the academic side and non-academic side in terms of, you know, choices. And then my fifth area, which also goes back to my number one, you see there's a recurring theme here, is evaluate. You know, ongoing evaluation of the process, but then ongoing evaluation of the outcomes. So, and we've seen in our work in Chicago, when with the expanded learning piece, it's 5 charter schools. In Chicago, there was, to everyone's point so far, is, you know, if you have more time on task, it does lead to increased achievement. So really collaborating with the day program and partnering with the day program to figure out that value added.
That's great. I appreciate your attention to the quantitative and qualitative data too. I think that's something that I know New York spends a lot of time thinking about. So Tiffany, at the Center for American Progress, you get this ability to kind of see across all districts. Are these similar to the trends you're seeing? Can you talk about what some districts are doing to expand learning and how they're managing that sort of change process of dipping their toe into the waters of expanded learning or going all in like Dr. Smith has?
Yes, so that is actually one of the advantages of working at the Center for American Progress, is that I'm able to sort of take a step back and look at what's going on across the country. And I'm seeing a lot of interesting things, and these are definitely themes that I'm hearing and seeing across the country. I've actually been paying close attention to a couple of initiatives that I find incredibly interesting. One is in Florida. It's actually a state initiative. A couple of years ago, I believe it was in 2012, the legislature passed a bill that required 100 of the lowest performing elementary schools to lengthen their school day by 1 hour for additional time for reading instruction, which I found incredibly fascinating that was something that actually came out of the legislature. At the time, I think that, as you could imagine, being in the position of a principal or a teacher in one of those 100 schools, you wouldn't necessarily think that was something that, you don't want to be identified as one of the lowest performing schools. But after 1 year, a lot of these schools, actually the majority of these schools, saw a difference in their reading test scores as a result, so much so that a lot of the schools moved off of the 100 lowest performing schools list, and some of the schools, at that point said, well, we're off the list, but this is working, so we want to continue to do it. And so they were able to find their own funding to continue the program. And it actually worked so well in that first year that they've actually expanded it. So now there are 300 schools that are participating in this and have the mandated 1 extra hour of instruction, and hopefully we'll see the same trajectory. I'm also paying close attention to increased learning time in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And I'm actually paying attention to Lawrence for a variety of different reasons, including increased learning time. They're doing a lot of very interesting things in the school reform realm, but they have actually lengthened the amount of time that all elementary and middle schools are spending in school, the time that they're spending in school, and by at least 200 to 300 hours. But what's interesting with this initiative, unlike what happened in Florida, where it's been mandated that extra time must be used for reading instruction, in Lawrence, it's actually the decision on how that extra time is going to be used, that decision is actually being made at the building level by the principal and the teachers in the school. And I think that that goes to the point that Leslie made, that it's looking at the data, looking at the needs of the school. And so some of those schools are using that extra time for small group instruction, if they determine that that's the best way to use that extra time. Other schools are focusing exclusively on math or reading. Some schools are using a combination of that time for enrichment and maybe more time for teachers. And they're, it's still pretty early. You can't necessarily say that it's an overwhelming success, but in Lawrence, they actually are seeing an increase in their test scores in both reading and math. So those are two things that I'm paying close attention to.
So you brought up a little bit about the sort of funding streams. So I think a lot of district folks who say that they're interested in expanded learning wonder how people are able to pay for it. And the Balts and New York examples are actually pretty different in terms of how they're funded. So Dr. Smith, can you describe a little bit about how Balts was able to fund this and how you made up those extra costs? And then Chris, can you talk about the New York City perspective?
Yes, it was very interesting. 5% more funding, but it's 11% more time. So people couldn't get past that. They said, you just can't do it. And so we started thinking about it. So you started, well, how could you do it? I mean, who does need to be paid and who doesn't? I mean, I don't need to be paid more. District personnel don't need to be paid more. The principals don't. You have to pay classified staff more, so you put that in right away. But then teachers, it's a matter of really what their contract is. It's you have a contract for 200 plus days or 180 plus days. From there, what we found is it really didn't need 11% more funding. You need about 7-8% more funding. So then it became, is the district willing to do 3 or 4% funding to do this? What I like to say is, what do we want and what are we willing to do to get it? So you have to be very serious about what you want. Do you want your kids? Are you really serious about this? People say all kids can learn, but it's more of a prayer than a commitment. It's the system is perfectly designed to get the results you're getting. Are you willing to change the system or not? And if you're not, then admit that and go on with whatever you're going to do. But if you really are talking seriously about wanting to change, thank you. It's frustrating because people talk, but they don't really do. And so you can find the money when there's, we spend 3 to 4% on a lot of things if you look at systems. is this what you're willing to put your money toward, or is it some kind of other program or whatever? This isn't a program. This is taking your system and changing it and improving it and expanding it and giving it more opportunity for kids. And when you do that, you'll see all kinds of growth from that. It's not a matter of saying an hour more of reading or something like that. It's a matter of letting the professionals in the system take the time, use the space and the time available to bring in now art, bring in more music, to bring in more science, to integrate those subjects and things like that, rather than squeezing down a system, which is what we've done as a country and even as a state, to where 3 months off and only 6 hours of instruction or whatever it may be, and yet we still have these high expectations. So as a leader, I wanted to take our system in a new direction to say, let's confront these and really tackle those issues, and we were able to do that.
In New York, we are using public-private partnerships. We're kind of modeling a lot of what nonprofits do year in and year out, which is blend and braid funding sources from a lot of different revenue sources. So each school has an allocation that they can invest in what we call teacher per session hours. It's to pay teachers to work extra hours each day, right? And it's up to the principal's discretion on when that time is offered and what the content area that happens there. And we provide guidance and support for schools so that they can do that and balance that against other investments the city is making. One of the things, I talked about leadership earlier, and by having this be a mayoral initiative and having this work extend beyond just the Department of Education, we're able to leverage partnerships with other city agencies. So we have a Department of Youth and Community Development, which invests hundreds of millions of dollars each year in out-of-school time or expanded learning programs, right? And so in schools that we're focused on, we work with the principals to balance and structure their teacher per session hours with the community-based organizations investment from DYCD is the acronym for that organization. And then we're looking at other models as well. So many of you heard Wendy Spencer speak this morning. We just received a federal AmeriCorps grant, Operation AmeriCorps, the city did, that's going to place AmeriCorps volunteers in 128 schools next year, full-time folks. They're going to work to bridge the school day and the expanded learning hour, specifically around mentoring, but also building parent engagement in the schools, right? So when we're talking about the mind shifts that this takes and getting schools and folks and our stakeholders to think differently about what schools can be, a lot of that has to happen at the parent level and getting parents to think differently and support parents in that process. And so we're going to use AmeriCorps members to help with that work. We've also been fortunate that the private sector has stepped up. So the Wallace Foundation, the Ford Foundation, among others, have invested in some of the system building, the capacity building work, training and technical assistance and communications and data platforms so that we have a system that functions well together. And I think it's a combination of all these different efforts that has enabled us to get to where we are now.
I just forgot, summer school is I could go on and on about summer school, but when you have summer school, you're putting resources into it, you're sending buses out to get kids, and half the week through they're half empty, and it's organizationally just a crazy idea, in my opinion. So the money, we didn't do summer school, and you could put those resources back into the regular day. So I encourage people to really look at what summer school is all about. What kind of messages is that really sending to the system? If you don't really do well, you'll go to summer school. Teachers don't really have to take accountability because they'll always go to summer school. So I could go on and on because I have a real problem with summer school. And so what we've done is basically said, let's go rather than summer school for some, let's have school for all, and then take 6 weeks off and be kids and be teachers and enjoy yourselves and then come back rather than trying to find a second job and so on. So I forgot to add that, sorry.
That's great. So I'm curious, and maybe we'll start with Tiffany, kind of what are the policy barriers to doing this? So if you're sitting at a district or at a state level and you want to expand learning, where are the policy hurdles that people have to jump over, and how are they doing it?
I'm glad actually that you used that word hurdles, because I feel like often I hear from people and they talk about all of the barriers, and I think, they're really not barriers. They are just literally hurdles that you need to jump over in order to lengthen the school day. And I often hear from folks that, the union, that's a huge barrier. How can you lengthen the school day if you have a unionized teaching force? And that's actually not so much as a barrier as a hurdle. You can work with the union. You bring them in early into the process when you're thinking about lengthening the school day at a particular school. You can pull together side agreements and renegotiate the contract. And in many cases, that is happening across the country. Recently in Boston, actually, I think the teachers union there, a very strong union city, they actually voted to lengthen their school day in all of their elementary and middle schools by 40 minutes or something like that. And so, you know, it is possible. So again, that's more of a hurdle and not necessarily a barrier. Financing is also something that I think would be not necessarily a policy barrier, but could be a barrier in general. And I think that what Jeff said, that, you know, that's something that you can work with. I think actually one of the biggest barriers, and Jeff sort of touched on this, that is hard to overcome is the culture of status quo. And how do you move past that? And I don't really think that enough people talk about that. It's, you know, it really takes a visionary leader, whether it's at the superintendent level or a mayor or a principal, to sort of rethink how you're doing things. You know, look at your budget. You know, you could easily find, not easily, but you can find a couple of percentage of dollars spent wastefully and move it to something that you think would be great, whether it's expanded learning time or something else. There's ways to work within your budget. There's ways to partner with community partners, which helps lower the costs. And so there's ways to work around this. I could keep going, but I'll let
Anybody else want to comment on policy barriers?
I'll comment. I think from a public perspective, one of the areas that government trips over itself is around the regulations and the stipulations that we put in for particular funding streams, right? So when we ask and we expect schools and we expect neighborhoods to blend those funding streams, but we're not thinking at a system level that this funding stream is going to require this and this one is going to require that, the rope and the strings that get, you know, it's almost like that cat's cradle game when kids take a different string and go around the room. You create this mess at the school level. I mean, one example of this in New York, depending on the funding stream, the staff that you spend to a school have to be fingerprinted by 2 different regulatory agencies, right? And if one person is funded by one and the other is there, and you got to send them to 2 different places, right? And so I think if we're going to be serious about this and we're going to invest and we're going to have the expectations of our school leaders and our communities, we need to think about what we're asking and why we're asking folks to do the certain regulatory work, right? And as a system, in my mind, that's one of the biggest hurdles and something that we need to own and clean up to make it more efficient so folks can get to work.
So I totally agree with what everyone said. I think the other thing, and this is not necessarily a policy piece, but it affects the policy. I think there's a perception issue with expanded learning time. You know, a lot of people feel like it's, you know, for, you know, only for a certain segment of the population, doesn't concern me. Other people feel like it's, you know, a babysitting situation, et cetera, which doesn't help when we're trying to change systems, when we're trying to change policy, et cetera. And I think, you know, having a different way of communicating what some of the wonderful things that are happening in expanded learning and using, you know, more technical terms around the success and outcomes that happen, so that it opens people's minds, and particularly on the systems level, opens people's minds about what expanded learning is. You know, I think there are a lot of schools that have longer, you know, you think about it, there's a difference in the general public's mind about a longer school day versus extended learning or expanded learning. You see the difference? and so not anyone in this room, but in the general public. So a longer school day, so when you think about that, you think, well, you're going to just have more time for English, math, social studies, and then do some enrichment, right? Expanded learning, you know, people think about tutoring. They think about, and they basically think about less accountability. So I think when we think about policy, the communication, how we, you talked earlier about the transparency, being very transparent in how we communicate what the program is and what the outcomes will be based on what indicators. I think that, in my mind, is much more helpful. It helped us be able to open up some space in a longer school day in a couple of schools in Newark, and then we were able to have the staff sign an election to work agreement for a longer school day. And so you see, so it worked. The change in language worked. So that would be one of my recommendations.
Right. So I want to throw it out. Do you want to add to that? Or I want to throw it out to the audience because we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have some time. So I don't know, is there a microphone out there? There is. So raise your hand if you have a question, and while you're sort of formulating your question and feeling that sense of you can do it, I'll got a couple here. Just go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bella Shaw Spooner. I'm with the National League of Cities. Hi, Chris. And I had a question for you, Superintendent. I know there's like 17 school districts in the city of Phoenix, something like that. I was curious if other school districts within the city have followed suit, and particularly, as Chris talked about the mayoral leadership, has Mayor Stanton embraced this, talked about it, and has there been any city involvement or investment or other support of city agencies as in New York?
Thank you. Yes, we have a great partnership with our city, Mayor Stanton, and the city of Phoenix. However, you have to understand that Arizona doesn't have the same, we aren't part of the city. We're in the city, but it's a state-funded system. And I won't go into great detail, but Arizona is a very unique kind of a situation where they don't really want to fund schools, so they put it off on the local taxpayers, which really amplifies what we were hearing this morning, where those that are in the most need get the most attention, and those that are the least get the least funding. So the state of Arizona doesn't have that kind of thinking where the city takes ownership of that. And so the partnership with the city is through Extended Day. We have many activities, and we have a partnership with our Boys and Girls Club where we built a Boys and Girls Club using, so what I do is I actually use that. What I just said was kind of a disadvantage. So we went out for a bond, and I said what we're doing is we're building an addition on our gym, but it's really a Boys and Girls Club. And then what we're doing is leasing the space to the Boys and Girls Club, and then that funding is going to pay for the after-school programs. So I guess what I'm getting at is that school leaders in the future, I believe, have to be ambidextrous. They have to be able to protect and preserve everything that a public school system is all about, while also being entrepreneurial and looking for different ways to fund. And Arizona is a petri dish of reforms, from choice, empowerment accounts, vouchers, and all kinds of things like that. So if school systems don't compete, if they don't provide a reason for people to want to go to those schools, there won't be a public school system in the future. And so BALTS has really been a reflection, and we've dealt with those challenges in a productive way of trying to really answer all the issues of public schools and to kind of evolve into a higher level of what we can do for a public and for a community, and also bring in more funding resources that go beyond just the state funding, because we know the state funding isn't necessarily going to go up.
Other questions?
Good morning. My name is Gwen Thomas. I'm the author of the Parent Smart Guide to Sending Your Kids to College Without Going Broke. And I also have a grassroots college readiness initiative. My question was, the gentleman mentioned that you work with AmeriCorps, or your goal is to work with them. Can you explain the parental involvement or the parental engagement initiative you're looking at, and the money that is delegated for or earmarked for parental engagement under Title I, Part A? Is that money really reaching the districts? I just, every time I contact school districts, no one has money. So if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So a couple thoughts on parent engagement. One, I mentioned earlier this notion of communication and supporting parents in adopting a different vision of what's possible at their school. And part of what that takes is giving parents a meaningful voice at the table. And so we have school leadership teams at each school, and it's mandated that a parent sits on that. They have a vote on budgetary matters around the school level, even from things in terms of hiring the next principal. So it's really finding ways to support parents' leadership development to serve in those roles. I think a second piece around parent engagement that we're really interested in is making sure that parents can serve as examples of lifelong learners for their students, right? So core to our community schools work is finding opportunities for parents to pursue their education at the school, whether that be a skill development, whether it be an ESL program or a GED program. We want to provide opportunities in the school building for parents to continue to further their education and serve as role models and examples for their students. Yes, we use our Title I parent money. We have parent coordinators in each school building, and then there's also resources for capacity building and professional development to support parent work as well.
Other questions over here?
I'll use my youth development voice. So I'm Mike with Higher Achievement, and we heard about the role of community partners and also day-to-day data. And so I have a two-part question. One, what advice do you have for community partners in working with school districts, both after school and over the summer? And two, how can we align evaluation efforts?
I guess that's me. What I would say is that what we do within the school day is very well designed and organized for learning. And so what we want from an after-school program is to continue that, to be seamless. It's not too many times what we say is the school's doing what best it can, so let's put something else on top of it to kind of mitigate it or to make up for all the losses in it. Really, the system's correct, and it should be designed to address all those missing pieces, and then an extended day should be seamless as much as you can make it. We also want to make it fun and enjoyable. The idea that kids have to stay another hour or two to be kind of crammed into more learning into their head is wrong-headed. It's not really getting to the long-term belief that kids are lifelong learners, that they enjoy learning, and so on. So it's a blend of fun and enjoyment. It's also a matter of consistency, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense organizationally for kids to kind of spend the day in one kind of a setting and then go to a completely different setting with different people. It's very difficult to do after-school programs because it's hard to get staff. Teachers are very busy, they work all the day, and then if we're going to depend on them to stay another couple hours, that can be a problem. So we need to have consistent staffing. It has to be, funding-wise, has to be, not cost a lot of money or be neutral in some way. And then it has to be somewhat seamless so that there's communication back with the teachers about how they're doing. And it should be able to be proven out with our benchmark testing and all the different things we do to track progress. And then overall, kids have to enjoy it, and parents have to enjoy it and want to be there and want their kids to be there. So that's my answer.
I would add two specific alignment strategies. One would be around aligning behavior expectations for all adults in the building and for any hour of the day. So if the school is using a PBIS system, if the school is using an incentive or reward system, that should be consistent no matter who the adult works for or what time of day it is. Second thing is aligning professional development opportunities. So making sure that in New York City, our chancellor launched a program this year where we've set aside time on Monday afternoons for professional development for teachers each week, making sure that we're bringing community-based organization staff into those as well, so that folks are learning at the same time and hearing the same information. So in some ways, it's not just about getting CBOs or nonprofits to be more like schools, but it's getting schools to be more like some of the youth development elements that nonprofits are really good at and finding the middle ground there.
So I'm with the Center for American Progress now, but I was actually an evaluator and researcher for many years before moving there, and I have a lot to say about evaluation. And I think, so I loved your data part. I think that evaluation is a very important part of looking at an extended learning time or expanded learning time initiative. And I think when you have that seamless transition that Jeff talked about, it actually might make it a little bit difficult to evaluate the program, because if it is that seamless, if it is that integrated and aligned with the school day, it could be hard to sort of separate that initiative from whatever other kinds of reforms that are going on during the day. And I think that's a good thing. That means that you are well integrated, you are implementing a lot of different reforms. It's not something that you're just simply tacking on an extra 30 minutes or so at random at the end of the day. And I think in terms of community partners, it's also important to evaluate that partnership. So, you know, you enter into it, and it might seem like a great thing, and you need to constantly reevaluate and reassess that partnership. What looks good in the fall might not be working so well for you in May or June, so you need to constantly reevaluate that partnership and make sure that it's actually meeting the needs of your students.
Well, and one thing I would add is collaborating with the day program and working together to figure out what your accountability goals are, and then establishing indicators for success, and revisiting them on an ongoing basis, so that you know, collaborating, decide, and not just with the staff from the school, but during the day, but also any partners, as everyone said, coming together to identify those accountability goals, identify indicators of success or performance growth, not just academic, but also non-academic, as Chris was saying, and behavioral. And then I agree with Jeff, you know, like looking at, you know, what are the students' interests? During this time, are they making any progress towards those interests, those dreams, those fun things that they like to do that also should be measured? Because as you know, as schools and as you know, enrichment programs, we should be making some progress towards the dreams and the interest of students and parents.
Other questions? Yep, got one over here.
Hi, I'm Jessica Gunderson with the Partnership for Children and Youth, and I wanted to dig deeper in regards to the alignment and integration of expanded learning. Chris, you mentioned professional development and kind of shared outcomes, but we really found in California, when we looked at which sites are the most integrated, it was the principal leadership being the linchpin, which a lot of us know about school reform as well. So I just wanted to know about successful system-level strategies to support, you know, principal autonomy and leadership that moves towards kind of an integrated system. And it can be in any, you know, in any jurisdiction, New York or otherwise.
I think principal leadership is critical in this work. And I think what a system can do is to align its investments and to support expanded learning work around goals that the principal is also accountable for, right? So I'll give an example. In New York, there's a program that targets 6th grade and 7th grade students in middle schools. TASC and the Department of Education work on this really closely. And it's really around improving literacy development and reading comprehension among middle schoolers, right? And so you're meeting the principals. This is a metric that principals look at. We've aligned our assessment. We use something called the Degrees of Reading Power, or the DRP, 3 times a year. And the principals and the nonprofits are structuring their time, both during the school day and after school, around that metric. And then what we're also doing is adding additional time for arts and other enrichment factors to balance the learning. So students that are assigned to book clubs or are in tutoring, they might be doing it during the day or after school, but it's really seamless around the different experiences that the kids get, all tied back to that one outcome. And so that's, the principal is accountable for that, but as a system, we funded that effort and supported it to be aligned with an outcome that the principals were responsible for.
I would just say that I'm in charge of an organization, so I look at it all organizationally. You have a school and it operates so many hours in the day, and then you're going to shut it down, and then now you're going to open it up again for something else. And so for me, I would like, just like I have summer school for all, I'd like an extended day for all. So that's the best outcome as far as I'm concerned. You're using the facilities to the best use, you're using the professionals and so on and so forth, you're using your leadership and your everything from payroll on down to support what it is you're trying to accomplish. When you have an after-school program, some of the issues are, let's say you have after-school sports, or you have tutoring, or you have teachers. We get off early on Wednesdays for teachers to have early for professional development. Well, how does that affect it? So you have to design the system to where you want it to be and then support it. And so after-school programs are wonderful, and I love to have them. But in a high poverty area, then how is the money? You know, how are we going to find the funding for it? Because we're not going to charge kids. So that would be some of the issues of it. But all in all, what we want is our kids to be in school a longer day and a longer year. for the benefit of the kids and the families, because our families also, they're working, their parents are working, and so the kids being in school is always going to be very positive for them and for the families.
Anybody else want to comment? Other questions in the back?
Obviously, the importance of bringing in some of that youth development and social emotional, both ways, as you were saying. So I'm just wondering, do you see the social emotional and youth development goals becoming intentional goals like your reading and math? And also, what type of pedagogical change or teacher development do you see required to fulfill that? And do you see that trend happening? Do we see that coming into the school day?
Well, one of the things that reminds me of your question is around student absenteeism, where it's very interesting that kids in first grade, you can actually predict their level of how many days they miss and their likelihood of graduating from high school. And so little issues like that, it's like, well, what do you do with that? How do you deal with that? So what we have is programs, JAG, Jobs for Arizona's Graduates, if you've ever heard of that. And so the whole idea is to bring kids in within the school day, to have the counseling, and like you said, the softer skills are a part of what we need to do during the day also, not just leave that up to something after school. That's their job. Our job is to teach them math. Your job is to, whatever, make them whole in some way. And so to build a system around the needs of the kids, another example would be what I hear a lot is we want kids ready for kindergarten. That's what I hear from our teachers. What we want is kindergartens ready for kids. But that's such a simple thing, but it's so difficult and so interesting, because when you talk to the teachers, say, my kids are behind. We look at the data and find, well, they're not as behind as you think. So you get a frame of mind thinking your kids are behind, so you start acting that way. So a whole system is really around that. Our kids are poor, helplessness, and so on and so forth, where we don't really believe that our system really can do what we are expected to do. And we've really created a system that does that. We pay teachers less, we have less time, we don't really believe in it as a society. And so all we can do within the system is change that and change that way of thinking from within, and not wait for someone from outside to come and change it for us. We are changing practices. We want to change practices. Another example of something like that is where I've just read about kids with post-traumatic stress syndrome coming in, so preschoolers. So now we want more preschools. But then again, well, what am I going to do about that? I'm not even sure where to go with that. But I want to now integrate that into our teaching. What are the practices that could be included within teaching? Not just expect some extra counselor to come in and see kids when they're in trouble, but how can we deal with all of our kids and approach it that they all need these kinds of skills? So professional development is something, like I said, on a weekly basis, we said this is important. It's important for our teachers to be embedded within the day, not to come after school and have to stay, but design our calendar so that the professional development is a part of that day. And then now what do we bring into that professional development to help teachers with their skills?
I think implicit in this also is taking care of the whole child, right? So if a child is hungry, what kind of food programs are you having? If there is trauma or stress, how are we investing in the mental health services? And I think that's something that under the administration of New York City, investing in mental health services that are school-based, right? So you're not just making a referral, but there's someone there to follow up. There's someone there to identify signs, and that we have a counselor, we have a clinic, we have a social worker there to support the teachers in that effort, right? So it's this notion of making sure that the school is equipped to support parents and communities and making sure their children are ready and able to learn.
So just real quickly, so we do a lot of school design and redesign work around, again, as Tiffany said, data. And I tell our clients that if you rethink the idea of school, that schools are not schools, they're nonprofit organizations that provide direct educational services. And when you think about an organization in that respect, your whole concept of design, particularly structural design on a school and then a system, changes totally. And to Jeff and Chris's point, if you look at who's enrolled and what are their academic needs, what are their non-academic needs, and what are their family needs, and you take care of the non-academic needs, the academic needs will the academic challenges will be overcome. And so for me, it's that whole idea of it's not a school, it's a nonprofit organization that provides direct educational services.
So I want to ask you what keeps you all up at night?
A lot. Where, I think, we're trying to do something on an enormous scale in New York, right? And so I think one thing that keeps me up at night is making sure that we're paying attention to the details and we're supporting people on a really ambitious timeline. I think the fundamental thing, though, that really sits with me is, are we setting our expectations high enough, right? And I'm always continually concerned that we're not. When we're talking about schools' capacity and communities' capacity, there's an interest that we want to make. We know how hard people work, and we know how difficult the task is, and so we want to make it easier for folks. But the fact is, we got into this work because we knew it was hard and we knew it was important. And so, as someone that is supporting building this system, I want to make sure that we are this notion of growth mindsets and making sure that our schools and our communities are having high expectations for our students and our families every step of the way.
Tiffany?
What keeps me up at night? So thinking about it from a policy perspective, I just wonder, is it really enough? What additional policies should I be advocating for? What more can I do to help you all be successful and to reach more children, to reach more students? I'm concerned that there's a group out there, there's a group of students out there that might be overlooked. And what are we missing because of that? What invention is not being invented? What leader are we overlooking in the future because the policies just weren't in place to capture it. So, that's something that I tend to worry about.
What I would say is that, I've been involved in school systems in public schools for 34 years, 33 years or whatever, and I'm so tired of just watching the same thing, history being repeated over and over again, where people just kind of wring their hands and look at and say, I don't know what, it's like it's the only way it can be. Schools can be so much better, so much more for children and for communities and for families. And so we've really worked very hard. When I look at the obesity rates for kids and for adults, 70% of the adult population is obese, 30% of the kids, diabetes rates are going up. The way kids are eating, how does that relate to their health, to their wellness? How does that relate to drug abuse and dropout and things like that? So it's looking for those clues that are out there that are right in front of us and just having the courage to bring them into the system and employ them into the system and prove it out, to prove out. Does a longer year work? I've been doing it for 6 years. And why aren't we looking for an answer? Why aren't we saying, let's test this? Why are we relying on some superintendent to come up here from Arizona and say, oh, it's working for us? Why don't we as a system say what works? And why don't we prove out those things? So that's what keeps me up, is I want kids to be happy and healthy. I think sometimes what we teach them around their lives and around their relationships is maybe more important than what we teach them in math and reading and science. And we have to, in my opinion, I think that's something we have to come to grips with the public school system, to say this is an essential part of what we do for kids and for families and for the future of our state and our country.
So all of that keeps me, what everyone else said. I think in addition to that, there's, the scale issue. All you guys in the audience, many of you are doing wonderful things. And we have had the privilege of working with schools and programs and districts and charter management organizations that are also doing wonderful things. So scale is something that keeps me awake. And then the other thing that really keeps me awake, because it boils my blood, is trying to get the general public to pay more attention to this stuff. And so that it drives their decisions around voting, drives their decisions around paying taxes. It drives their decisions around, increased accountability. The fact that the general person, lay person outside of this field truly believes that their kid is enrolled in a school that can compete globally, it just boils my blood. So that's what keeps me awake. So yeah.
So Lindsay started the last panel saying how hopeful she was. So although we just heard a litany of things that can keep us all up, I also think as I look around this room and see a lot of our colleagues at Task, as well as a lot of people who've been doing this work for a long time and yet still are in it and feel the energy and the inspiration of talking about expanded learning and thinking about how to scale. I mean, some of the themes I heard was sort of, I love the idea of being ambidextrous and entrepreneurial. I think it gives you that cat's cradle idea. But we've got some great leaders here. Please join me in thanking them for their remarks today. And thanks to all of you for your great questions. So, Rich, are you going to direct us next? Thank you all.
Thanks, Saskia. So we're about to have lunch, but the ITC staff needs to reset the room for lunch. So in a moment, and by in a moment I mean it's now, I guess, please gather your things and head swiftly into the foyer, and then we should be back in just a few minutes. What time? I think it's 12:11 now. Let's give the ITC staff until 12:20. Is that okay, Kelly? In between 12:20 and 12:30. Just wait for the doors. And if you're a vegetarian or a vegan or have a food allergy and you picked up a colored ticket at registration, please place that on your place setting when you return.